Anyway, okay, so you were running through a list for me of teachers that are basically, was it because of budget cuts? They're retiring, they're leaving? Is that what's happening?
Well, a lot of people have been talking about reductions in force as a result of school funding cuts. And there's been a lot of talk in the newspapers by school superintendents and so on about how they're going to let the reductions in force occur naturally through attrition, retirements, and so on and so forth.
Which, on the face of that, I don't mind if somebody wants to, well, I'm near retirement, I'll just go ahead and take it early. There's a part of me that says, that's a great idea.
And it sounds like it's happening around the state, a number of people taking early retirement. But our Constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, requires that we have this visionary, unsurpassed, best that we can do education system. In combination with that, there's been a lot of research come out in recent years about the fact that the single most important thing in education, student achievement, is the teacher, a quality teacher. There are big variations in what one teacher can do with a student in their progress versus another.
Right.
Those differences are enormous, they're lasting, and bad teachers can have very pernicious effects, long-term effects on students. So when you see we're supposed to have this excellent education system and teachers matter the most, the biggest single factor, you have to question why the education system keeps talking about how we're going to just let reductions in force occur randomly. What they need to be doing, in my opinion, is identifying those great teachers, those who are able to get student achievement to rise, keep those people, and get rid of the clinkers. Everybody knows teachers are not created equal.
Right. Well, and we had talked about it when you first mentioned it. First thing I thought it was teacher tenure. And I understood it when I first heard it to be, well, you got a great teacher. You're trying to incentivize them to stay. That would be tenure. But tenure turned out to be, well, you've been here for a couple of years, therefore we can't fire you no matter what, which means you have a lot of bad people who just do what they have to do to make sure they get tenure, and then they can just coast the rest of the way.
Right, and tenure systems were invented for some very good reasons, but at the same time, they have their unintended consequences. It is, I think, a fact that school districts around the country are reducing their tenure programs, lengthening the amount of time it takes to get tenure, and reducing the protections that it gives you. Certainly, our tenure program here in Wyoming does tie administration's hands to some degree, but the emphasis needs to be on the kids and the quality of education they're getting, not on a jobs program, not on retaining people. Gee, we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. We need to pay for performance.
Okay, now not like we really need to make this argument or beat it, because I think everybody understands this, but I think one of the best examples I ever saw, North Carolina, I was living there for a while, and they had failing schools. So federal government comes along, dumps billions into North Carolina. Carolina immediately starts to build schools, all brand new schools, latest state of the art. Forget chalkboards, we're going to have smart boards, which are basically like big touch computer screens, massive touch computer screens. Amazing stuff, amazing technology. Every student got a tablet, et cetera, et cetera. So I would walk into these brand new schools, even in tiny little towns, brand new schools, very impressive schools. Test scores didn't change. Dropout rate didn't change. They were still poorly performing schools, which means it wasn't the technology, it wasn't the building, it was the teacher.
There's a lot of evidence to that effect, and we need to go that route.
Okay. Now, can you give besides the fact that kids are doing better, is there any recommendation you can give the state on what to look for a good teacher versus a bad teacher? Because apparently they have a little bit of a problem figuring that out.
Well, I'm not the professional research. A lot of the really good research has come from a guy named Eric Hanushak from the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Super powerful guy, heavily quoted by lots and lots of people, and I would refer people to his research. But when a good teacher can get a full year's more performance out of a student in a given period of time than a bad teacher, it's a good risk-reward thing to look into.
So what you're saying is our state superintendent of public instruction, or as I call her, the school marm, needs to just go through. I mean, I would say student by or teacher by teacher. Just go through and start evaluating to see who they're going to let go and who they're going to encourage to stay.
Well, I think these staff decisions are made at the local districts.
Local district level. Instead of at her level, you go down to local district
That's right.
level. Grab your headphones here. Someone's calling in on the line. This is Glenn. Who's on the phone?
Hey, this is Alan. I just was going to say that I somewhat disagree with your guest's assertion because I still contend, and I wish somebody would actually do the research for this. You can have the best teacher in the world, but when that teacher starts out with a student who is worried about where their next meal is coming from, or the social economics of that student, that plays, I believe, a far bigger factor than exactly what a teacher does with that student. Because I say you take the, and I wish somebody would do this, take a teacher who is supposedly the best teacher in the world, put that teacher in a Title IX school with kids who don't have dual parents in there, who don't care about their education, and that teacher will not do nearly as good as a teacher who is a mediocre teacher, let's say, but who is teaching in a school that has both parents involved in that school, in that child's life. And I think that that's something that we forget about as a society so much, that it starts at home.
Okay, and let me follow up with something on that. So there are, and I've seen this, I remember this when I was in high school, I've seen classes where they basically take all of the troubled students and put them in one class with one teacher. And the teacher has, even though she's specially trained for something like this, has just a horrible time with these students. And so at some point you look at the teacher and evaluate them as poor because they had a classroom full of bad kids?
Well, I want to thank the caller for calling in and bringing up this point. It's an important one. But I do want him to know that the research has included those kinds of factors and controlled for them. And what they've found is that students under those conditions actually benefit the most from a good teacher. Their performance will improve percentage-wise much more than a student from a good socioeconomic background under this, the same quality of teacher. So good teachers benefit students under difficult circumstances even more. It's more important for those students to get a good teacher than anyone else.
This is Glenn. Who's on the phone?
Yeah, this is Russ.
Yes, sir.
I guess one thing that with your discussion that I'm concerned with too is, we talk about getting rid of tenure. And I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not a teacher. But when Colorado got rid of their tenure program, I do have an aunt that wound up getting fired because they had a teacher in her grade level that had more seniority, and to get to that teacher, they had to get rid of the other teachers below her. And, then we turn around and we drum out good teachers trying to get after a bad teacher. And like where I work, one of the issues is there's plenty of ways to get rid of people. Most of the time, the administrative people don't want to go through the hassle of doing it.
Well, okay, let me ask him again. Let me follow up with your question and something, because it sounds to me like what he's saying is that, they got rid of tenure, but they still had to go through people who have been there longer in order to get rid of somebody, which sounds like that was tenure to me. So it doesn't sound like they just got rid of people strictly based on performance.
Well, I want to, again, thank the caller for bringing this up. Personnel decisions are always difficult, and as I said earlier, tenure systems were not invented for no reason. There are reasons that positions need to be protected. But at the same time, school administrators, just like any other employer, have got to do the hard work of separating the performers from the non-performers. This is about kids' education, the single most important thing in a kid's life, determining, their success in life. And so it's crucial that kids get good teachers, the good teachers are identified, and the weak ones are either improved through development or something, or they're let go. They need to find another profession.
This is Glenn. Who's on the phone?
Hey, Glenn, it's John.
Yes, sir.
We've discussed about the supervisors and the teachers and the materials, but at the core of it is the student motivated or not?
Good question. Sometimes they're not. I remember not being
I think
motivated in
I
school.
think that might be the primary determinant.
Well, now,
if
but
a
would
student
you,
doesn't want to excel because they're not interested in
Yeah.
academics, you could have the best teacher in the universe.
well, let me ask you though, could you think though that a really good, inspiring teacher could motivate, even the least motivated student?
I think that they would have an influence, but a teacher, depending on if they have a 1 hour exposure to the student or all day exposure to the student, they're competing with their 0 to 6 years of age of the parental culture that was, the child was exposed to. And if the parents didn't value education, then how are we to expect the child to?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks for calling.
And those are good points. But still, the bottom line is, will even the least motivated student benefit from a good teacher, a great teacher, as opposed to an average or ineffective teacher? That's the point I think we want to talk about.
Right, and I think the hardest part would be then, but I'm not in the industry, so I don't know, but would be to identify exactly how do we identify a good teacher based on what? Because in Wyoming Liberty Group sort of led the charge in this. Some of the tests that they have don't necessarily say whether the students are really doing well or not. So you got to find a good way to gauge how do you know the student's doing well?
And that's a key point. The definition of student achievement, that is the term that's used in the research, and it's commonly accepted. And I guess I would refer you to the research for an accurate definition of that. But it's based on outcomes, and it's based on a number of different factors, depending on the data that's available. Of course, it has to be data driven, but there are ways of identifying teacher effectiveness.
Okay, more with Wyoming Liberty Group in just a moment. So time wrapping up our discussion with Wyoming Liberty Group about schools, and we just got done talking about tenure, which can be a difficult problem, especially if there are teachers who are deciding to retire early, as long as we're not allowing the good ones just to walk off like that. But then I did have, again, the school marm, our superintendent of public instruction, the school marm for the state of Wyoming, sitting right where you're sitting right now, and I asked her the question, so do you think Wyoming schools are top-heavy? And her answer was, well, yes, we are. And we were just talking straight budgetary, are we top-heavy? But as you were saying, that goes down to the local level, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And there are different ways of, you have to ask yourself, what does top-heavy mean? In one look at this topic, we found some national statistics, federal database, and we wanted to look at it on terms of a head count rather than dollars. And this data gave us the total number of staff in the schools by state, total number of teachers in the schools by state. And so subtracting the one from the other, you can identify easily how many non-teachers there are. So when you take the number of non-teachers and divide by the enrollment, you get a ratio of how many students are being supported by a single non-teacher staff person. Nationally, Wyoming ranks third. We're at 9.9. This is 2013 data, the most recent available. We were at 9.9. The national average was 16.2. So we've got a lot more non-teacher adults in the building than all but 2 other states. Well, okay, then I ask myself, well, is it fair to compare Wyoming, as small as we are, to much larger states? So we narrowed it down to states with total enrollment 200,000 or less, and that brings you into a list of states like, well, District of Columbia is on the list, but New Hampshire, Hawaii, but there are some smaller ones, our peers, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, in there. Even there, Glenn, Wyoming is second. Our number is, again, 9.9. North Dakota is 12.6. South Dakota is 13.5. Montana is 13.6. You have to ask yourself, why do we have to have so many adults in the building compared to other states our size?
And I want to know is what are they all doing? I'd love to know what they're all doing.
Well, non-teacher staff would include your administrative folks,
Yeah.
Pure administration, but they also include counselors and nurses and
so on.
folks
Okay.
of that.
Well, and also I know that there's a lot of special ed teachers. That's been so you have your teacher, but you have other teachers going around helping. Kids like me, dyslexics, but also problem students and so on. So, okay. Well, of course.
So we'll be looking at this in more detail in future to try to separate out the pure administrative people
Right.
from everyone else.
This is Glenn, who's on the phone.
This is Lisa.
Yes.
I taught at a charter school in Fort Collins that used the core knowledge curriculum, not Common Core, core knowledge. And that curriculum was so good that it did motivate the lower learners, and it also challenged the higher learners. And on top of that, someone sent me a document of schools and the people that are paid over $80,000 a year across the state, and it's broken up by school districts. Our music teacher at Pioneer Park makes $81,000.
What do you think is...
We have some very well-paid teachers.
Well, what do you think is a reasonable salary for, let's say, a music teacher? I wouldn't know where to start with a number for something like that.
I don't know. I taught for 30 years. I never made over 30.
Right.
I think you should make a decent wage, but I don't think you should be the highest earners in the community. It's a government position.
Right. And I also wonder if that would go by state. Because, for example, I know people in Massachusetts, you look at how much they make in salary, you think, whoa, that's a lot of money. Then again, the cost of living in that part of Massachusetts is so high, it kind of averages out. It's not a lot of money. Go down to Florida, and, well, it looks like the salary's really low, but the cost of living in Florida is really low, so it depends on where you are.
I
agree with that. I agree with that. And I have a friend that's kind of working on that aspect. But, again, if I was going to a restaurant and I got a lousy meal,
Yeah.
I wouldn't go back to that restaurant. Our schools are not performing it to the amount we're spending on education.
Okay, I'll let you finish.
I believe education in Wyoming salaries are generally based on tenure, certification, continuing education type steps, and so on. All of those things are not necessarily relevant to how effective a teacher is. Also, curriculum, as you mentioned earlier, is considered to be an important part of student achievement. But the research shows that it is less important than having an effective teacher.
Okay, thanks for coming in. Where can people find all this research? You posted it?
Yes, it's up on our website, wyliberty.org.
Bob, thanks for coming in. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.